Good morning. Welcome to our 11th MHST Sharing and Learning webinar. We've got our guest speakers from Young Somerset today, Ruth and Gemma. We're just waiting for a few more people to join before we get going, just to make sure nobody misses the start. While we're waiting, if you'd like to pop your name and your service in the chat channel, it's nice to see where everybody's from. If anyone needs any technical help this morning, we've got Emma and Louisa online. Please do message them individually in the chat channel if you need anything. Whilst we're waiting, I'm Jen from Maiden. Our mission is to create digital technology that changes what's possible for clinicians and patients. We've got a lot of our iAptus customers here today and others. Our software is used by a mix of trusts and charities, both local and national, so there should be a good mix of people here today. Just a few things before we get going. We are recording this session so that we can share it with you afterwards. If you don't want to be seen, just keep your camera off. And hopefully there'll be time for a Q&A session at the end. If you have any questions while you're listening, please pop them into the chat channel, and Louisa and Emma will be collating them. And then after the presentation, if you'd like to ask your own question, please do. Otherwise, I can ask it for you. I think we've probably got enough people online now to get going. So welcome to Ruth and Gemma. They are here to describe their use of risk questions and the exploratory questions that they've developed around the different aspects of risk to deepen their understanding and can contextualize the risk to children and young people. So without further ado, I think I will hand over to them to introduce themselves a bit more and tell you what they've been doing at Young Somerset. Over to you, Ruth and Gemma.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, it's really nice to be here today. So we're Ruth Gavenlock and Gemma Fitzjohn, and we're both service managers at Young Somerset in our mental health and wellbeing service. So Gemma kind of sits more on the MHST side and I sit more on the CWP side, but obviously there's a lot of commonality in terms of the interventions and the risk questions the risk that we're going to talk about today. So Gemma, do you want to share the...
Yeah, sorry, I thought I just had, but bear with me. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
So we're going to start by just talking a bit about Young Somerset. Some of you may have heard of us. So we've been around for just over 25 years. Originally started as a very much focused on youth work, open youth clubs, that sort of thing. But now we very much more targeted, and we have we'll sort of talk about some of the things that we do. But this is what we build relationships, we encourage inclusion, promote lifelong learning in Somerset generally, but we have actually had connections with Australia, haven't we, Gemma? But,
yeah.
but generally in Somerset. So if you move on to the next slide. These are just some of the ways that we do that. So very much led by young people. I mean, as you know, interventions, both CWP and EMHP are very much led by young people. They choose their goals, they choose what they want to do. We're collaborative, so we collaborate a lot with Exeter University, Maiden, lots of other organisations. Obviously, it's evidence-based, what we do, and responsive to need. We work with up to 4,000 young people a year. We raise, earn and spend about 3.6 million. And it's interesting because when I joined as a trainee in 2018, and our mental health and wellbeing service consisted of 2 people at that time. And we now have a team of about 50 in all, supported with clinical supervisors, safeguarding officers and sort of non-clinical support as well. We've got 116 staff and a voluntary board of directors and a youth participation group. So we've got 3 kind of strands of work, really: targeted youth work, alternative education provision, which includes enterprise. So something quite exciting that we've done recently is we have a shop where young people are able to sell their own art and craft work, and also do work experience. We've got internships. So of course risk comes into all of that as well. Our targeted youth work, we actually have a youth work project that works with young people who've been admitted to hospital, who've tried to take their own lives, or are in quite a crisis state, and we have a youth work approach to working with those young people, which is quite exciting. And then we have our mental health and wellbeing. So we've got the CWPs, the EMHPs, and a non-clinical support team. And early years, did you want to just say one little bit about
early years
Gemma?
is really new to Young Somerset, but we are now supporting 0 to 5 as well, and their parents. And we've got a trainee at Exeter University currently going through the training to be able to deliver evidence-based interventions as well for those parents to support them. So we're really excited to introduce our early years delivery to Young Somerset.
Yeah, and I think we're in the process, aren't we, Gemma, of looking at how that might affect the risk questions that we ask. And so it's early days. I mean, that's only just sort of started, really. So the subject of today's webinar, and I realise that you're all thinking, well, we know about risk, you know, and I think I'd probably be feeling the same if I was attending. But even when I was creating the slides, I was thinking, oh, well, that's something I haven't really thought about. So I think it's always worth revisiting things, just, you know, to have that refresher. So as you can see there, requests for support for our service come from a variety of sources. So it's also self-referral in terms of the CWPs, parent carers and professionals. And then our EMHPs, it's through the mental health leads in schools. So in terms of risk, with self-referrals for our CWP service, they're checked as soon as they come in, and they prioritise the self-referrals. And if they mention risk, then somebody from the team will ring them and, if appropriate, fill out a safety plan. And obviously in a school, then it's the safeguarding lead or the supervisors who'll be the first port of call if any risk is disclosed. So what we're trying to ensure there is, I mean, although, you know, obviously our website and the referral form say that we are definitely not a crisis service, we want to make sure that, you know, if a young person has mentioned it, that we respond straight away. So this is important, isn't it? That risk is dynamic. So what you hear on the day is very much what the risk is there and then. And things can change very rapidly. So it's a snapshot. And also, I mean, one of the kind of key things as well is we can only work with disclosed risk. So if people choose not to share, and we know that sometimes it takes a young person quite a while to feel safe enough to disclose something. And of course, but I mean, if we think they're at risk, even if they haven't disclosed it by something that they've said or something we've observed, then obviously safeguarding overrides any lack of disclosure. But then I think another thing that I thought was interesting, and I can give a little story about when I started working, you know, that our own experiences, personalities influence our perception of risk. So very much when I started way back as a family support worker, I was really bringing my own experiences of my own family into it. And I was allowing that to kind of cloud the way that I was thinking about young people and the risks they presented. And it took, you know, it took somebody kind of pointing that out to me in a polite way for me to kind of step back and think, yeah, no, actually, I do need to think about this a bit more objectively, and be very aware that our own experiences do influence that. And I've put a little bit of a thing there because I really am not a dog lover. I know that most of you on the call probably are. So for me, to see somebody changing a baby on a bed with a dog on the bed, I would feel that's a high risk situation. Whereas somebody who is a dog lover would probably see that in a very different way. So that's just a small example of how. Have I missed anything there, Gemma? Do you think there's anything you would add to that?
No, not at all. I think you've covered that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so there's another thing here about empathy and rational compassion. So all of these things here influence how we see risk. So our own fears, our own values and beliefs, and that could be cultural, religious, or whatever, our own experiences, and our perception of the situation as well. You know, you can show two people the same photo of a room and one person will assess it as safe and another person will assess it as risky. And we see that quite a lot in our own teams. And so you get that confidence versus complacency, you know, and that's a risk in itself. So I think how we kind of counteract that is by having very regular clinical supervision, regular line management, regular updates on training, because I think it is easy to get complacent about risk and start to kind of, and you're kind of ignoring the individual and the individual circumstances. Yeah, so that's what I would say about that. That was just an example of a safety plan, but I think good to sort of remind ourselves about what sort of questions we need to ask. And also, I think for me, a safety plan is about seeing a young person in there as a whole, rather than just anything that they might be bringing to us. So, so looking at the positives as well, and looking at their, you know, it's got a good example about, you know, what are they loving right now? What are their hopes for the future? But I think what's even more important is to recognise that a safety plan in itself does not keep a young person safe. You know, you can give people safety plans till they're coming out of their ears, but if they never look at them, or as we know with young people, they can be very impulsive. So they're not going to go, oh, hang on, I think I'm just going to get my phone out and get my safety plan up. So I think it's quite important to have to talk to a young person and say, what's the one thing that you might do in a situation if you feel at risk? Make sure they've got a phone number in their phone. So it's just about being realistic, I think, about safety plans.
I think just to add to that as well, we do try and encourage the young people to show a safe person so that they are showing somebody else, and that somebody else is aware that they've got a safety plan in place and what they could do to support them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Gemma. And often we would encourage them to make that safety planning with a parent or a trusted adult. Yeah, definitely. So we're going to go through now what we cover. And as I say, this won't be new to you because you're all obviously running a CWP or EMHP service or delivering or involved in it. So we've got that historical and current. So we go through thoughts, plans, actions, history. And in terms of self-harm, I've put in there about the risk. So is the young person aware of the risk? So do they know what to look out for? Like, you know, would they know what to do if they've cut too deep? Would they know that red lines going up your arm is probably a bad sign? Are they aware of some of the long-term impacts? Do they know how to get medical help? And those protective factors are really important as well. I think with the suicide, and I mean, this is, I guess it would be dependent on the kind of conversation you're having with the young person, but it might be useful to think about, is there any history of suicide in the family or with friends? And to look at the sort of the context of that. Gemma, is there anything I missed there with?
Only to add where we kind of guide the current and historical. So the current, we would say within the last 2 weeks or since the last time I've seen you, because obviously they're weekly interventions. So at assessment, it would be within the last 2 weeks. And historical is obviously anything they can remember up to the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. Yeah, that's a good point. So we also look at risk to others, and who, from a young person's point of view, who keeps them safe? Who do they feel safe with? A risk from others to the client. So there's all kinds of issues that may arise there. So it could be domestic violence, bullying. I think that comes up quite a lot, doesn't it, Gemma? Bullying.
Yeah.
And then that's maybe about establishing, is this actually bullying, or is this one kind of unpleasant encounter they've had with somebody? And I think as well there, it would be certainly an EMHP and CWPs would then be checking with the parent about the school to see whether the school are aware of that and to find out what's been done about it. Relationships, so healthy, unhealthy relationships. Our practitioners had access to some C-card training and training on healthy and unhealthy relationships. So we think that's something that's quite important. Also, sexual abuse. There's a new legislation that's come in that says that we have to report sexual abuse. So we need to ask the right questions around that to establish if that does constitute sexual abuse. Like the age of the people, whether there was any coercion involved. I've left that a bit vague. I apologise, but we can certainly find the more definite description of that. Risk from others to others. So that could be, somebody discloses that someone attacked their brother. So, that's something we'd obviously want to look into. Yeah, anything I've missed there? Obviously, we're giving a bit of a sort of, we're aware of the time constraints. So.
Yeah, I think just to add that we do ensure the language is appropriate for that child or young person, considering their age, any neurodiversity, etc. We also ensure the parents are aware if their child is younger that we will be asking these questions, not quite like this, but we will be asking about risk and kind of getting their understanding around those words that we're using as well. Do you understand what it means when I say this? So that we can use that language appropriately.
No, that's a really, really good point. Because I think what we try and do is normalize that we can talk about self-harm, that we can talk about risk, that we can talk about suicide. And to be fair, I mean, most young people that I've talked to, they're not fazed by it at all. It's parents often that feel more uncomfortable, isn't it? And then it's just a case of really trying to have that conversation to say why we do that and why it's important. And as you say, Gemma, certainly we've put on training as well about neurodiversity. So that would mean things like making sure that your terms are very clear, making sure that you're asking one thing at a time rather than a kind of complex question. Yep, someone said safeguarding. Absolutely. So, you know, if any of this raises a safeguarding concern, we've got a safeguarding officer and we would take it to them straight away. Or if you're in a school, you'd take it to the safeguarding lead at the school. Absolutely. Yeah. So then we've got questions around eating, hygiene, sleep and safety. So in terms of eating, and someone pointed this out to me, like, you know, if you say, do you have 3 meals a day? And someone says, yes, what does that actually look like? So what are you actually eating? Because if you're having, you know, one Cocoa Pop, that's not a breakfast, is it? So it's kind of asking questions around that. Do you ever skip meals? Energy drinks. I was reading an article. There was something today, I think, about a rise in cancers in young people, and they kind of linked it to energy drinks. So, and also with highly processed foods, the ultra processed foods as well. So eating, so that could be, do you have any issues with body image? Are you comparing yourself to other people online? And then obviously there's a huge conversation about social media. So we would ask people, you know, do you find your social media useful? Do you find it, or is it actually giving you problems? Is it worrying you? I think we've seen a rise in ARFID as well, haven't we, Gemma? So
Yeah.
where people are restricting certain foods or kind of, and that could be linked to neurodiversity. It could be about texture. It could be about taste, that sort of thing. Have you aware of any other issues that have arisen in terms of food?
No, not any more than the ARFID, in all
Yeah.
honesty.
Yeah.
I think it's just becoming bigger due to social media, but that's a whole nother conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of hygiene, yeah, do you have access to hot water, showers, baths? How often are you cleaning your teeth? Do you know the importance of this? And I'm really aware that, you know, there's a lot of people struggling at the moment. And so this may be not a question of choice, but it might be a question of actually not being able to access because your electricity's been cut off. So again, that could raise a safeguarding issue. It could mean that, you know, we need to get that person linked in with some support or something. And then, of course, a big question is about feeling safe. Yeah, someone said about ARFID being very difficult to diagnose. And I think when we're obviously not in the position of diagnosing that, it's more about keeping ourselves up to date with asking the right questions, I guess. And then, you know, if we think there's any issue there, then signposting to, in our area, it would be Sweden, wouldn't it? Or,
Yeah.
Yeah, mainly Sweden. So yeah, so do you feel safe at home? So that's another big question that we might ask. I'm just checking, just going to check my notes, Gemma, just to see whether there was anything else on that one that I'd made notes on.
Okay, I'm also trying to go onto the next screen and it's paused.
Okay. Have you managed to do it?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Just gonna stop sharing and share again. Sorry to everybody.
It was going so well up to there.
It certainly was. Okay, let's try again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can see it.
good. Let's hope we don't have to do that again.
So now we're on drugs, so to speak. So smoking and vaping. I mean, this is interesting, isn't it? Because vaping was very much touted as the answer to people smoking, but I think they just don't know the long-term effects of it. And I mean, it is worrying that young people are seeing vaping as a fun, safe alternative to smoking. So yeah. So we would ask if they smoke or vape. We'd ask how often. Also, how do you get them, pay for them? Because that might bring up questions around inappropriate friendships. It might bring up issues of, you know, a wider issue around money and where they're getting the money from. Do they understand the dangers? And also, do they want any help? Because we've got we've got signposting to particular smoking cessation services and things like that that we can give young people. And then drugs. So, and this is an interesting one as well, isn't it, Gemma? You know, you were talking about changing things for younger people, and that there is a sort of an issue, isn't there, about do you ask, what age do you ask these questions? Because we know that some 10-year-olds are smoking and are exposed to drugs. So it's an interesting one, isn't it? Like, you've got to be careful that we're not asking or not asking the right people.
Mm.
And there's no real sort of answer to that. It's a sort of judgment, really, isn't it? So do you use drugs? How often? What are you taking? How do you pay for them? Where do you get them? And also, like, where are you doing it? Oh, going back to the drinking. Oh, no, we're not on drinking. That's next, isn't it? Yeah. And also, you know, the dangers from drugs, because obviously there's no point in sort of ignoring the fact that people take drugs because it's fun sometimes. So we've got to be realistic, and we've got to be able to have an open conversation. So I think what I'm trying to say there is about really being non-judgmental, but being curious, and sort of pointing out dangers, but without, like I say, without making that young person feel bad or shamed. And that, that can be quite a difficult line to tread, really. And maybe as well, I mean, I'd have to say, being slightly older, that people might use terms that I'm not familiar with. So that might be a little bit about keeping yourself up to date around language, but we're probably always going to be, as adults, probably always going to be a little bit out of touch with what phrases people are using. Yeah. The next one.
Lovely, thank you, Ruth. I would, but again, it's pausing, so I'm going to stop and
yeah, someone's
share
mentioned prescription drugs there, and we do get on to that. I think I've got that on a slide as well. While you're looking, Gemma, there's one, I realised that because I wasn't looking at my notes, there was one important thing that I forgot to say when we were looking at, when we're asking about risk. I mean, I know, with Exeter, you're kind of asked to rate risk, aren't you? Sort of no risk, low risk, medium risk, high risk. And I think that's tricky when risk is dynamic. But also something that I think is really important is how we respond to young people if they say that there's nothing, they, you know, they feel that they're not at risk at the moment. And I think it's important not to go, oh, that's great, oh, that's good. Because then if something happens in the intervening time when between you meeting, they may feel, oh, they were really pleased that, you know, there was nothing risky going on, and maybe I shouldn't share that now there is. So I think it's important to be neutral, I guess, rather than giving the young person the impression that it would then be bad for them to disclose that there is something risky. I think, does that make sense? Does that make sense, Gemma, to you?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not to be, you know, I'd not really thought about it like that. So, oh, someone said that I've started to say thank you rather than great. Yeah. And I think that's probably a good approach. Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
Because that then lets the young person know that it's okay to say something different next time. Oh, okay, they're not taught. I think that might have changed. Oh, that's Jonathan. And you'd know Jonathan. Thank you for that. As I was going back to my training, Jonathan, there rather than what they're taught now. So yes, so going back to sleeping, and it's interesting because in Somerset there's a county-wide effort for everybody to get together to look at sleeping, because whatever somebody is presenting with, whether it's mental health problems, whether it's physical issues, a commonality is difficulty sleeping. So they're looking at, can we have a sleep pathway to help people, you know, as soon as they're reporting that they're having difficulty sleeping, so make that part of a normalized process, I guess, in Somerset. So again, ask lots of questions like, what time do you go to bed? What's your routine? Do you have trouble getting to sleep? Are there any strategies that you use? And again, this could, you know, bring in stuff around the cost of living, because somebody may not have a bed. You know, they may be sleeping on a blow-up mattress on the floor. They may be having to share with other people, which is stopping them from getting to sleep properly. So again, it's important, isn't it, to ask around that and to get those, you know, what's going on for that young person. So drinking, how much are you drinking? What are you drinking? And again, I think this is interesting because we had a session on risk at work, and one of the youth workers brought what they felt was a safeguarding issue, which was a 15-year-old drinking half a pint of cider with their dad once a week when they watched the football. So from their perspective, this was a risky, very risky behavior. And from a lot of other people's perspective, it was like they didn't see what the problem was. So it's, you know, it's really interesting, isn't it, how we all have those different views, and that's what we've got to be careful that we're looking at what's actually going on, what might the harms be, how does the young person feel in terms of the harms, are they worried about it? And again, we ask all those questions around, do they know the problems associated with drinking? And with drinking and drugs, you know, there's wider problems than just what might be going on physically if you take drugs. I mean, getting a criminal record can really affect your ability to get certain jobs, to travel. I think apparently Donald Trump now can't go to 37 different countries as he's now a convicted felon. So, you know, having a criminal record has a major effect on your ability to do certain things. Okay. Oh, you're not
Thank you,
able to
Ruth.
leave it on.
No, it keeps pausing every time. So we've got one last slide. So bear with me, everybody. There we go.
Yeah, so social media, we all know that social media can be a force for good. It can also be a force for evil. Well, evil is probably a strong word, but it can cause an awful lot of problems. And I remember we had someone come in from the police to talk to us at work, and it was absolutely terrifying. There were things that I had no idea about. That young people could hide apps behind a fake app, and so they were able to kind of access things without you knowing, even if you looked at their phone. Just going on your Xbox, you don't know who you're talking to, so often young people are groomed that way. What was the thing I found out about? It was something to do with being able to, there's an app, was it TikTok, that tracks you unless you turn it off?
Snapchat. That's Snapchat with Snap Maps. Yeah.
Snap Maps. Yeah. So unless you know to turn it off, then people know where you are. So yeah, I mean, it is terrifying, all of those things. So that's about asking a young person, how do you use social media? Do you know how apps work? Have you ever seen anything that's worried or disturbed you? Do you gamble? Because that's a really growing problem as well. It's so easy. And also, like when you're like on Roblox or something like that, you can, there are cases, aren't there, where young people have spent thousands of pounds. They shouldn't have access to their parents' credit cards anyway, but they've spent thousands of pounds buying in-game things. So somebody did mention prescribed medication. And I think as well, there's issues these days with people accessing certain medications, like buying them online. I don't know, like puberty blockers, that sort of thing, or being denied a certain medicine through the usual channels and then accessing it themselves. And of course, you don't know what it what's in it. So yeah, and over the counter, yes, obviously, if people are stocking paracetamol or things like that, that can be a real risk. I'm just going to check my notes and just see if there was anything else on that one. Yeah, so I had snap maps, fake accounts, scams, messages that say you can make lots of money, body image issues, cyberbullying. Because of course, when I was at school, I could get home, shut the door, and I was completely safe. Nowadays, those, safe from bullies or whatever, now they're with you 24/7. Gaming platforms can be subject to abusive comments. You don't always know who you're talking to. Pop-up adverts, disturbing images, TikTok, misinformation. And I think, we've seen things like with Andrew Tate, conspiracy theories, right wing, all of that. Young people, especially if they're lonely or, can really get sucked into some of those very much more unpleasant sites. Yeah, incels. And also a rise in self-labeling and self-diagnosing. So I think, Gemma, we've seen, haven't we, a lot of young people who now say, they've got anxiety or they've got depression, and they're kind of self-diagnosing when actually what they're feeling are really normal reactions.
Emotions, yeah.
Yeah. So, if somebody close to you dies, you are going to feel like you've been hit by a bus. You're going to feel, pretty darn miserable. And that is completely normal. So I think a lot of normal reactions to things are being pathologized, and people are sort of labeling themselves, which can then really I don't know, you can get kind of boxed in to a situation, can't you? By sort of labeling yourself like that.
That was the
Okay.
last slide, so I will stop sharing.
Okay.
Stop pausing.
Thank you both. That was really, really interesting, and I'm sure everyone found it really useful. I know I did. We do have quite a lot of questions, but it would be great for people to ask them themselves if they want to. Our first question was from Liz. Liz, if you want to turn your camera on or your audio on and ask your question, please do. Otherwise, I will.
Hi. Excuse me. Yes, no, I was interested in the idea at the beginning of rational compassion. And I was wondering if you could say a bit about where that idea comes from and explain it for me.
That's a very good question, Liz. And I'm going to have to say that I pinched that slide from our clinical supervisor. So what I'll do, because I don't have any more information on that, but I know he has some really good stuff around it. So if you'd like to pop your email in, I will get something sent to you about that.
Thank you very much. Yes, I will do.
Yeah, and I think some of it was about kind of the empathy can actually be a negative because it stops us being objective. So, you know, we need to be compassionate, but not get, you know, but we've got to keep that distance. So what I'll do is I'll share it with Jen, and then she can send it out to people. All right.
Lovely. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Next, we had a question from Danielle around college settings. Danielle, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yeah. So I'm quite new to a college setting, and we have one other colleague who's also in a college, and I think there's some sort of questions around when we're dealing with young people who are 17, and might be some risk that presents, and they don't want to share that, or if the college feels that it shouldn't be shared and we should be shared. So I think we're feeling a little bit like unclear, and I just wondered whether you had any experience around that or any advice.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose technically up to the age of 18, a young person, I guess if it's safeguarding, I think, you know, you can override, but it's a tricky area, isn't it? Because there might be things which at 17 are not necessarily a safeguarding risk. They're a risk, and you know, if the person was young, you would share that with a parent. I don't think there's a clear answer to it. What do you do at the moment with that?
So at the moment, we've just put a hold on one-to-one work. We're just sort of concentrating on that whole college approach because we are a very, very new service as well. So I think we want to just get these things, you know, processes down and ironed out. And so we're sort of at the process of just discussing it really and thinking about how we might want to approach it. But it is a very grey area, isn't it? Like you say, there is no clear guidance. There is so much risk, and it is subjective, and there is more risk at that age. It is surprising, well, not surprisingly, but it is difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's a clear safeguarding issue, then I would override, you know, the young person's wish for that not to be shared, as long as that in itself didn't put them at risk, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, if the risk was from the family or the parents. Yeah, because I mean, you've also got that issue of you don't want a young person to then stop telling you things, you know. So I do. Gemma, what do you think? I mean, because obviously with EMHPs, they only go up to 16, so that.
Yeah, we have lack of experience from EMHP side with your age in college, obviously. I think I would just, as you probably are already, just ensuring you have those really open conversations with that young person to start with, to say, you know, I may have to share what you tell me to ensure that you are safe and kept safe. And just so long as they're aware of that.
Yeah.
Can I just share that I work in high school and we've got sixth formers, so they go up to the age of 18. So I could be with a 17-year-old, 16-year-old up to 18, and then we'll and I think it's just about sharing that, being upfront, and when you're doing your confidentiality, and then that gives you the confidence, and talking it through in terms of who you can talk through that with, and having that relationship with parents as well, I guess, because they are under 18 as such. And I think it's that that balance really. But as they would, like the lecturers, if they were to be given some sort of safeguarding disclosure or whatever, it would be it would be done in the same way, wouldn't it? It would be like making sure that parents are aware, especially if it's around risk, and if they're responsible for keeping them safe still, if they're still in their home and stuff. But I tend to find it works. I think if you're just upfront, clear and honest, do your confidentiality in the same way that you do with your any age, then that sort of covers you, and it gives you a bit more confidence to then talk through who that would be and who you'd share that with and why, and they can be part of that, and they can be part of the safety planning. And then it's talking about that discussion around parents and how they can keep you safe, and maybe that's a discussion that we could have together or whatever. I don't know if that helps.
No, I think that those are all really, really good points. And of course, I suppose I just took it for granted that we've had that. I didn't. Obviously, any conversation we have with a young person, we do have that statement, and that we're very open, honest about what we would have to share. And when I was practicing, I would often say to a young person, can you give me an example then of something you think I might have to share? Because just saying I might, they might not really realize what we're talking about. So it was always good to get them to kind of give an example. And I think, if you can, it's always best if that young person talks to a parent, isn't it? Or carer. So I think a lot of it is asking them about what the barriers are to them doing that. Why do you feel you can't share that with a parent? It might be, well, would you like me to kind of meet them with you and talk that through? So yeah, I mean, there's lots of, but I think you're right that the first bit is about having that open and honest conversation that you will have to share if you feel that young person or someone else is at risk of significant harm. So yeah, no, good points.
Thank you. Before I move on to the next question, we had another Danielle H, with her hand up for a while. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, it was hello. Sorry. Hello. It's not letting me use the camera, it's asking me all the blockers to come through. I was just saying that in respect of that conversation about 17-year-olds and being very mindful of those limits to confidentiality and the transparency of the conversations that we have, but also conversations about how much information is somebody. So if somebody's saying, I don't want you to share anything, but just almost going through what would you be okay with sharing, which bits are all right, which bits aren't, because sometimes there can be some framing around it that can be really useful to do. But I was also conscious of things like coroner's reports that have come out and have been taken seriously by universities, for instance, because they've had young people accessing support services who are under their care, and parents have not known because they are over 18 and confidentiality has been respected. But there's been questions around, actually, should somebody who is close to them have been informed that they were struggling and needed help, because there was a safeguarding implication for an adult. So it's not even as straightforward as saying at what age, because in terms of adults, there are still limits to the confidentiality that anybody can keep as a practitioner, because you've got to manage that vulnerability around. So it's I think it's quite a tricky area in deciding, making those decisions. So that's one of the reasons why I'd always say, talk it through with a supervisor and a safeguarding team, and make sure that you use robust peer support and supervisor level conversations when you were unsure about the decision to make, so that you can be really clear about the ethics of it, and that you thought about that, what was in the best interests of that young person all the way through.
I think that's a really good point, Danielle, and I didn't sort of emphasize that when I was talking, that obviously none of our practitioners make any of those kind of decisions on their own. So we very much encourage, you know, if it doesn't feel right, if your gut's telling you something isn't right, we would always encourage you to go and talk that through with a DSL, the safeguarding officer, your clinical supervisor. You know, there's never a stupid question. So if it doesn't feel right, you know, do go and talk it through. So I think people are never making those kind of decisions on their own. I think that's a really good point that you've made.
Thank you. Next one is from Alishba.
Hi. Yeah. So I've just finished my training year with Exeter, funnily enough, and obviously I'm still learning as I'm going. What I've found out though is a lot of people, or young people, say that they might not have an adult outside of school to talk to, but I think they're just thinking like in the immediate family, they may not want to. So I just wondered how other people might have approached that question about trusted adults outside of school, just to help them think on a bit more of a broader, wider scale rather than just in the house.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Alicia, but you know, it's not, sometimes people don't feel that home is a particularly safe place, and so it might be exploring, are there other family members, is there somebody in school that they trust? Yeah, you want to have a kind of wider conversation, don't you, about, and that's, you know, when we talk about those protective factors, that's where that kind of conversation can come in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Lauren around self-harm, if you're there, Lauren.
Hi, yeah, it was just around like adapting those, I guess, like more advanced questions if there is risk that's posed around self-harm, how you would adapt that to like primary school age.
What you mean, how you might ask a younger child about self-harm? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so it was more so around the questions of like what their awareness of risk is, and how to know like, or how to tell if they've like cut too deep, or how they would get access to medical help and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, I suppose it's about being very honest and transparent and clear, isn't it? About, and maybe, you know, using clear language, and checking with them all the time what their understanding of things is. But I think very much if you're talking about younger children, then we would be hopefully involving the parent in those discussions. So it would be about making sure the parent is aware of what to do and what to look out for, especially with a younger child, because, you know, the parent would need to take responsibility for that.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same. I think it's getting an understanding of that child's knowledge of the questions and language that you're using, and that parent can be really, really helpful in that, whether that's a phone call beforehand, or if they're there in the assessment or intervention session with that child as well. That we definitely try and work with the parents where we can with younger children.
We quite often signpost to sites like Papyrus, or I can't remember the other ones, what it's called now offhand, but you know, we've got sort of 2 or 3 sites that we do signpost parents to, because often parents are very obviously quite reasonably quite frightened about the subject,
Mm.
and don't know, you know, and just want to say, oh, don't do it, you know. And sometimes we have to explain that actually that young person is using that at the moment. Obviously, we want to move them to a, you know, a less risky way of dealing with their emotions, but this is about recognizing that that might be something they are going to do, and so what is the safest way of dealing with that? I know some parents find that a very difficult conversation, so I think having those trusted sites that they can go and check it out and look at is quite useful. Yeah, Young Minds, that was one of the other ones. Yeah, have a very
Yeah.
good section on that, because parents, you know, like I say, quite understandably get quite frightened about the subject, some parents.
Mm. And then there's just one further question as well that I had around like use of social media, and any like additional questions you would recommend to ask if they do disclose that they're speaking to people online who they don't know in real life.
Well, I guess, you know, if they're that potentially a safeguarding issue, so I would have thought sharing that with parents. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd ask, you know, what apps, what type of conversations they're having, how old is this person, just gather as much information as possible, and then share it with the parent. Were you aware this was happening?
And they can report
and
it,
then
can't they,
yeah,
Gemma?
yeah.
So they can report if they're concerned that there's somebody talking to their child, they can report that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've probably got time for just one more question, but if Ruth and Gemma are happy, we will pass the other questions on to them, and then we'll include that in our post-event email. Stephanie, if you're still there, you had a question around staying safe online.
Hi, yeah, I think actually you've answered it. I asked it before you went to the slides, so you kind of covered the things that I was wanting to go over there. So I don't know whether you want to pick out another question rather than mine.
Thank you. I'll quickly nip to Sarah then, if you're there, around risk assessment for younger children. Not sure if Sarah's still there, and I think it was partly covered in the answer to Lauren's question, but I will send it on to you both.
Okay, yep, no problem.
Can I just go to the social media thing again as well? I think it's a real case of keeping up to date of what is out there, because it changes constantly, and children are very, very knowledgeable when it comes to IT and apps and phones and things, especially if they've got older siblings, and it's way beyond usually the parents and adults as well. So it's just really keeping on top of that.
Great, thank you. Right, I think we're at the end. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you so much, Ruth and Gemma. That was really, really interesting and informative, and we will send everybody the slides and the recording and a summary blog, including some of the top tips from today and some answers to the questions. We are hoping to have a hybrid event in September, mid-September, to get you all together. We will still have the online element if you can't make it to Bath, but we will send details of that. If you've got any questions in the meantime for us, please do contact us, events@maiden.co.uk. I think that's it, unless anyone has any desperate last moment questions. And we will see you next time. Thank you very much for coming.